So my name is Brian Chesky. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Airbnb.com. So I wanted to start by asking you guys all a question. So think back to when you were growing up, the home you lived in. Raise your hand if when you were growing up, you had a power drill in your house. You guys know a power drill? Raise your hand. Come on, there were more power drills. Right. So probably you had a power drill in your house, and your next door neighbor probably had a power drill in your house. And I bet when you were growing up, almost everyone on your block had a power drill in their house, right? It turns out in the United States, there are almost 80 million power drills. And yet the average power drill, you know how much time it's used over its entire lifetime? 13 minutes. There are 80 million power drills in the United States. Everyone has one on the block, and it's used 13 minutes. If you were like the average person, a third of every paycheck, a third of the money on your paycheck is used to pay for the house you live in. And yet you don't use the majority of the space that you pay for. If you're like the average person, you spend $8,000 a year in your car, and yet it's idle most of the time. This isn't super efficient, but you know what? It wasn't actually always like this. In fact, we are hardwired to share. Sharing was the default way that human tribes connected, literally for 45,000 years. And in fact, when we came up with the concept of Airbnb, which basically allows you to share the extra space you're not using in your home with people all over the world, I remember telling my mom about the concept. And well, my mom, who was a baby boomer, who grew up was born in 1951, my mom thought I was a little bit crazy. But I guess she already kind of thought I was crazy. But my late grandfather, I remember telling my late grandfather about Airbnb. And when I told my late grandfather about Airbnb, you know what he said? My late grandfather, he said, "Of course." And I said, "Grandpa, what do you mean, of course?" And he said, "Well, Brian, this is how I used to travel when I was a kid." And it turns out that it's true. Before World War II, we shared. And then something happened. After World War II, we were told to start spending. We were told if we spend, we will stimulate the economy. And what happens is we started consuming more, a lot more, after World War II. We also used to live in cities, especially in the United States. And after World War II, we started moving out of cities. And we started living in suburbs, where we became disconnected. And the further away we got from people, the less we started trusting each other. And we started staying home, where we'd watch TVs and we'd be isolated in our own cars, in our own homes. And it truly happened that we stopped sharing and we became very individualized. And in the last 50 years, we have consumed more in the last 50 years than we have in the entire history of human history before that. We have consumed more in the last 50 years than we have in the entire human history before that period. But this is now changing. There is a new movement. It's starting. We just heard about it before, and it's called the sharing economy. It's this idea that access is, in fact, more powerful than ownership. You know, I live in San Francisco. That's where Airbnb is based. It's based in San Francisco. And in San Francisco, farmers markets are really popular. Who here goes to farmers markets? Do you know there's more farmers markets now than there are Walmart? There are more farmers markets around the world than Walmarts. And when you go to a farmers market, it turns out you have 10 times as many conversations as you would at a supermarket. When you go to a supermarket, you don't talk to anybody. When you get a farmer's market, it's a social experience. And this is how we bought food up until 70 years ago. We used to trade at harbors and crossroads, and trade and the economy was actually a collaborative thing. We used to share. Airbnb really is not that new of an idea. The sharing economy is not that new of an idea. It's kind of a 19th century idea, or maybe an 18th century idea, or maybe an idea that came from the last 45,000 years before World War II. And beyond things like farmers markets, obviously there's Airbnb, and I think we're the protagonists of this new model online, And there's many other companies, and we heard about some of them before. TaskRabbit. We used to only have one job, but now a lot of people are renting out their own time to other people. With GetAround, people are sharing cars, or with Relay Rides and RideJoy, they're sharing their own rides. With Loose Cubes, they're sharing office space. And there's over 1,000 spaces around the world, co-working spaces that you can now rent. This is a growing movement. We used to try to keep up with the Joneses, and now I think we're sharing with the Joneses. It's completely different, and I think it's what we call the third wave of the internet. You know, in 1995, something happened. There was all this commerce that was happening in the real world, and it came online. So maybe Amazon was a bookstore that came online, or eBay were like crafts fairs or antique fairs that came online. And then there was a second wave of the internet, and it happened maybe around, let's say, 2004, where we came online and we started connecting together online. And Facebook is an example of connecting with other people online. And I think there's a third wave of the internet. Right now, I think is the third wave of the internet. The third wave of the internet, the first wave was getting online, the second wave was connecting together. I think the third wave is about connecting offline together in the real world, where we become more social. And this is happening on Airbnb literally all over the world. In fact, we are in 19,000 cities in 190 countries. And here in Munich, we have 1,300 homes. We have 8,000 in all of Germany. And I want to talk for just a moment about New York City. In New York City, we have 10,000 homes. In fact, if you were to fly to New York today, and you were to go in any city block in New York, and it actually doesn't matter what city block you go to any city block in the world, in New York. Look to your left, look to your right. Anywhere you look, you literally will be looking at an Airbnb, because we are on every single block in New York. And these New Yorkers are making, on average, $21,000 a year on our website. $21,000 a year. People in every single block, and sometimes in almost every single building in some neighborhoods. In fact, we have some hosts in New York making almost $100,000 a year. And this is transformative income for people. In fact, the sharing economy, I think, provides a lot of benefits beyond just the people renting. Of course, sharing economy allows people to make extra rent or extra money with the assets they're not using. For our site, travelers now have access to people, places, and spaces all over the world they never had access to before. But the benefits of Airbnb aren't just to consumers. You know, I think the benefits of Airbnb are about bigger things as well. My goal is in the next 2 years. Well, I told you before we're in 190 countries. So here's a goal. What if 2 years from now, I could say this, I could stand here and say that people in every single country in the world have stayed and have lived together with people in every other country in the world. That is where we're moving towards. Last year we connected people, and people lived together in 90 countries. And I think within 2 years, we will literally be the first time people will connect together in every other country in the world. Can nations actually war if their residents live together? I don't know, but I hope it's less likely. You know, 10 years ago, I went to design school. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design. And when I was at RISD, there's this huge movement called the sustainability movement, the green movement, you know, being ecologically friendly. We saw Al Gore talking about it during Inconvenient Truth. And I think we all believed in it, and I think we all do. There was one thing about the movement that I think may have slowed its progress. The idea that we all have to sacrifice to make the environment better. And I guess the idea is, what if we didn't have to sacrifice to make the environment better? What if actually making the environment better was actually better for us? What if we could save more money, have a more social life, share more, and make the environment better? And I think that's at the core of what the sharing economy is. It's not just a sacrifice. It's actually a better way to live. That's what I hope. There's another thing that on Airbnb we didn't really predict in the early days. And this is that Airbnb has also helped in the sharing economy as well. You can see this with GetAround and a lot of other companies. It's starting to simulate local economies. So let's take a city like Munich, or like maybe let's take New York again. It's a very iconic city. So if you want to stay in a hotel in New York, what you'll probably do is fly to New York, you'll check into a hotel, and most of the hotels in New York are around Times Square. Almost all the hotels in New York are below Central Park, around 40th Street and Times Square. Well, it turns out, if you stay in Times Square, you're probably going to eat in Times Square. And you're probably going to go to shops in Times Square. And you're probably going to hang out in Times Square. Ask an average New Yorker what they think of Times Square. I'm originally from New York. We don't really like to hang out in Times Square. If you want to have a local experience in New York, do not go to Times Square. Go to the Lower East Side. Stay in a home in the Lower East Side. Wake up in the morning and see what it's like to have breakfast at the local coffee shop. See, what's going to happen is if there's homes in every neighborhood in the world that tourists are staying in, that means those tourists will also eat at all the local coffee shops. And those businesses in Times Square are not New York businesses. Those are multinational corporations. But those local coffee shops are New York businesses. So there's a movement here of people stimulating local economies. That's also through sharing. You know, oftentimes people ask me, like, what's the vision of our company? And I think it's a broader vision. I hope with Airbnb that we can help make the sharing economy happen in a very broad way. In fact, I think if we are successful, and if the sharing economy itself in a broader way is successful, I think people will one day forget what the world was like before the sharing economy. In fact, one day I hope maybe our kids' generation will live in a world where you could go to a city like Munich, and with a click of a button, you could literally virtually unlock any door in that city and have access to all the city's spaces. You could share any asset, any car, you get access to any space. You see, here in Munich, you can't get into almost any space here. Most of the doors are locked to you. They're not open to the public. But with a broader currency of trust, where we all have online reputations, we actually could have access to much more. You see, it's the idea that access is more powerful than ownership. And access means we can experience much more of the world. I hope the sharing economy does become possible, because I think the sharing economy, sharing really is a better way to live. And, I think if we are successful, that will be a better world. Thank you.